Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new season of Oscar Book Club. So, this was a series that I started last year to sort of give myself a supplemental thing to do in between the Oscar prediction videos. Now, I've decided not to do an Oscar prediction video until after Cannes, because that's when I'm going to have the most amount of new information. Of course, we already have some new information. I think Sinners, at this point, I feel fairly confident is going to be a part of the awards race. And we know some things, like Michael, are probably not going to be a part of the awards race, but I still don't know where I stand on certain things, so I'm not going to officially do it. But I did want to get back into this series, and this particular book, I got it a while ago, and I've been sort of struggling to get through it, partially because I've been very, very busy starting like a actual real job that has taken a lot of time, but also because the book is, it's not an upper, as I'll get to, which makes it somewhat challenging to get through, but I do want to clarify this is a really, really good book. Before I get into that too much, I just want to say some of you, I imagine most of you probably know what Hamnet is, at least in terms of the film that's coming out this year that we know is going to be a top awards film. So Hamnet, the movie, is the follow-up from Chloe Zhao. She previously directed Nomadland. She also had The Rider and most recently Eternals, which that particular movie I almost feel doesn't count because you took a brief detour in the MCU, but now you're back making like something real, for lack of a better term, something that's definitely going to be in the awards conversation, at least based on the premise. And it stars Jessie Buckley and Paul Mescal and Emily Watson. So there's a lot of eyes on this film. But this was one that I wanted to get the book. And I did say initially that the first book I would get would be Vineland. I also got that book fairly recently, and I'm going to start it very soon. But for now, we are going to start with Hamnet. So this is going to be tricky to talk about in terms of content. I will say, first of all, this is a very good book. And even though it took me a while to get through it, mainly because of my schedule, I would recommend that you read this. It's kind of a difficult book to talk about in terms of spoilers, because I think most people going into this book have some idea of what it is. And in many ways, it meets those expectations, but in others, it does not meet those expectations. So first and foremost, the very first thing you read when you open up the book, there is a historical note that reads the following. In the 1580s, a couple living on Henley Street, Stratford, had 3 children, Susanna, then Hamnet, and Judith, who were twins. The boy, Hamnet, died in 1596, aged 11. 4 years or so later, the father wrote a play called Hamlet. So that is the information that the book gives you right at the very beginning, and which is why I feel comfortable saying it and expressing it, because that is pretty much the book. That is pretty much what happens in this story. There's not a ton of huge surprises, and yet the way it's written is so fascinating, because obviously this is a book about William Shakespeare and his wife and his children, but it doesn't take the typical approach that you would expect it to take. First and foremost, the name William Shakespeare is never spoken once in this entire book. We know who it is, obviously, but he's always referred to as a young tutor, and then later Agnes's husband, and later Hamnet's father. They never actually say the name, and they know that we know who it is, but they very much keep him in the background as much as they possibly can, because we've seen a bunch of stories about Shakespeare already. And so this story is really and truly centered on his wife. And many of you probably know that his wife was named Anne Hathaway in real life, a fact that I always found amusing and often wondered if we were ever going to get a film where Anne Hathaway played Anne Hathaway. However, in this book, they made the decision to call her Agnes, which was an alternate name that was sort of interchangeable with Anne at the time, and they have some historical record that she had been called that by at least a few people in her life. So this book is very much historical fiction. The note at the end of the book flat out says that not much is known about Shakespeare's family. And so the author, Mackie O'Farrell, very much took that as a cue to do whatever she wanted and to really explore this woman in a really rich, fascinating way, because the book almost has these droppings of supernatural realism. It's hard to explain. So the book is primarily focused around these two timelines that we jump back and forth with every chapter. And one timeline is set in the quote-unquote present, with 11-year-old Hamnet and his sister being sick initially and him trying to save her, and the events that ultimately result in his death. And the other timeline, which takes up the bulk of the book, deals with the flashbacks, with William Shakespeare, who is not called William Shakespeare, and Agnes meeting, falling in love, getting married, and having these 3 children. And it's so weird to see. It's weird to talk about the story like that, because story-wise, there's not a ton of huge surprises. From the very beginning, you know these 2 are going to get married, they're going to have 3 children, one of them is going to die. That is all spelled out, and yet the way we arrive at these points is so fascinating. And the way that this author chooses to describe things, she has such a way with language, not unlike the great bard himself, which is really, really interesting. And this character of Agnes, again, she's almost feral, and she doesn't really relate to people that much. She's very much focused on nature and animals and plants and potions, and yet she also has this unique ability to look at someone and read them, and she gets these sensations of the future. Again, it's just on the edge of supernatural realism, but not ever to the point where it goes too far. And it's really, really fascinating to read about. Even though for so much of the book you know where it's going, and in many of the scenes it's hard to face it, I think this main character of Agnes is such a dynamic, interesting person. And it's not the most girl boss feminist take on Shakespeare. It's not something like Anne Juliet, because the book is very realistic about women's roles and expectations at the time. And so even though she's an incredibly strong, capable, intense person, there is realistically only so much that she can do. And she falls in love with her husband because he is a brilliant man, and she does love him, and he does love her, and he is a genius. And at the same time, there's still certain things that he just can't understand about her life, no matter how hard he tries. And so the way that the author depicts this marriage and the relationship they have with their family and their kids, because they both come from somewhat abusive households, is all really, really fascinating. And it's the sort of thing that's really hard to describe. You sort of just have to feel it and sit in it, which makes it really interesting to figure out how this is all going to be adapted for a visual medium. I do want to take a moment to talk about the ending. And even though so much of this book is hard to spoil because you know from the very beginning that Hamlet's going to die, the very final scene is one that I did not see coming on my read-through. And so I am going to actually put up a time zone where if you want to go into this book, and I highly recommend that you do, please skip to the time zone while I talk about this. Because what the book does at the ending is so powerful. I was enjoying the book, but the ending made me truly love the book. What's so fascinating is you know that Hamnet, obviously, there's a reason why Shakespeare chose the word Hamlet for the title of this play that has gone on to be known as one of the greatest things ever written. And you're wondering why. And you're maybe looking for some parallels between the story of Hamnet and Agnes and their family and the story of Hamlet. And it's possible that there are some very subtle parallels that I didn't pick up on, but the really obvious ones, this character is meant to be this character, that's not really there. So much of the story has nothing to do with the story of Hamlet. And in fact, the husband being the William Shakespeare feels almost irrelevant for large chunks of the book. You almost forget that that's who he is. You just get the occasional line here and there about how he works in London at a theater, but it's so not the focus of the story. And then you get to the very end, and what the book does that is really interesting is Hamnet dies about 2/3 of the way through the book, and after that we get this whole long section that is like 90 pages long with no chapter breaks, which is a bit intimidating, I gotta be honest. I did have to take a break in the middle of that, but you get to the very, very end, and we find out that Shakespeare, some time after Hamlet's passing, has put on this play without talking to his wife first. His wife is under the impression that he's putting on a comedy, and when Agnes finds out that that's what he's doing, and she sees this playbill with her son's name, it shakes her, and she goes to London by herself. And that moment, when I realized this is what the final scene of the book is going to be, I was really nervous and really excited, because even though we all know the reputation that this play has today, all of that seemed irrelevant, and my main question is just how is she going to react to this? And she even admits when the play starts that this doesn't seem to have anything to do with her son or her family at all, and doesn't understand why he would have chosen that name. And then we come to this moment where the actor portraying Hamlet walks up onto the stage, and Agnes is just frozen because she sees her son who died years ago at this point and now would be at the proper age of this character. And what she realizes is that this actor has all of these little physical tics that she knows from her son, everything that she recognizes from his son, the way that he walks, the way that he carries himself, all of these little things that most people wouldn't pick up on, but she picked up on them, and her husband picked up on them too. And he has essentially, through long meetings with this actor, he has done the impossible, and he has brought her son back to life. And on top of that, they take the historical note that some of you may know about Shakespeare himself playing the role of the ghost, playing the role of the dead father who is also named Hamlet. It becomes this really fascinating thing where he has done what so many parents of deceased children wish they could do, and create this narrative where he is taking his child's place. And once she realizes that, everything about this book really clicks into place. And I remember reading it, being so moved and almost a little angry in that writerly way of, God damn it, that is so perfect. Like, it's rare where you see something that is just so perfectly conceived of and so well written, and you're like, well done. That is, you have to give the author the laurels for that one. Even though I enjoyed the rest of this book, but I fell in love with that ending. And so, walking out of this book, and this is where I'm going to put the spoiler marked 13 minutes in. So this book really was powerful and really was moving, and I know it's being adapted into a film. As I was reading it, I was asking myself the question, Oscar contender or not? And for so much of the book, I was like, I don't really know. It could go either way. It depends on how they adapt it and how artistic they want to be with it. And then we got to that final scene, and I'm like, well, there's your Best Picture nomination. I think if you do that final scene right, then Oscar voters are going to be so moved, and they're going to be like, yes, we have to vote for this. So, and I have no doubt that Chloe Zhao is going to do justice to this story, and especially that ending. I know I've said on this channel before that I was not a big fan of Nomadland, but my problems with that film had to do with the story and not necessarily Zhao's direction. I think the material of this book is stronger than the material for Nomadland, in my personal opinion. And so I think this movie could do very well with the Academy. I think it's a shoo-in for categories like costume design and production design, just based on the setting alone. I think it could contend for screenplay. We'll see what the cinematography and score and stuff has to do with it. In terms of performances, I think Jessie Buckley should be considered a lock. She's a previous nominee, and this role, I heard some people say who hadn't read the book, oh, is it just going to be her grieving for 2 hours? And it's not that at all. She gets to express so many emotions, from joy to anger to frustration to eventually grief. The wildness, the feralness of this character. I was unsure for some parts if Jessie Buckley was the right choice. I thought, is she a little bit too conventional movie star for this role, but I am going to trust the casting process, and I'm going to trust that Chloe Zhao knows what she's doing by selecting Jessie Buckley for this role, and I am ready to be blown away because there's multiple scenes in this book that could all conceivably be her Oscar clip. And so I'm really, really looking forward to this. Now, in terms of Paul Mescal as her husband, I know in my initial Oscar prediction video, I had him in for lead actor. Now, having read the book, I feel fairly confident that he's going to go supporting. Now, he could still go lead. I don't know for sure how they're going to adapt it, but the tricky thing is this really is not William Shakespeare's story. I think if they try to sell this movie as it's Paul Mescal as William Shakespeare in the Shakespeare biopic, that's just not going to ring true because this ultimately is not his story. He's an important part of it, but it is really about her. And I think Chloe Zhao is going to understand the importance of framing it all around her. So Mescal is going to be supporting. That said, it's going to be a decently sized supporting role, and he could contend if the movie is seriously in contention. Now, in terms of other characters you might contend, Emily Watson is playing her stepmother, and she does get a few notable scenes in that, and it's been a while since Emily Watson has had a really, really good role. So I could see her being in contention, but I don't really know if she's going to get the scenes, and she's been sort of out of the spotlight for a while. David Wilmot is playing John, who is Shakespeare's abusive father, and there's some scenes of him being just absolutely horrible that there might be there for some voters to bite. Joe Alwyn, I think I had him in my predictions initially. He's playing the brother of Agnes, but I don't think that's going to be a prominent enough role. And one performer who might get some stuff is Jacoby Jupe, the child actor who plays Hamnet. I think he's not going to get supporting actor coverage, but he's going to get any young actor nominations that they are, because I think there are just enough good scenes for that character to be highlighted. He is the titular role. So, yeah, with that said, I do think Hamnet is going to be nominated for Best Picture. There's still a lot of unknown factors, but I think Chloe Zhao is going to be a really great fit with this material, and I think this story is going to affect a lot of people and move a lot of people. Even though the story of William Shakespeare and the story of Hamlet is so familiar to so many people, I think this is a different angle that so many people will not have seen or thought of before, and I think it's that perfect blend of familiar yet fresh that is going to appeal to a lot of voters. And you could argue with the power of that final scene playing into the importance of stories, which the Oscars always love a movie about that. So I do think Hamnet is a serious contender to watch out for this upcoming Oscar season. So before I log off of this video, I wanted to say I actually got the book Wildwood, which was going to be adapted by Leica and do an animated film, with the intention of reading it and covering it next on the channel. And as I was in the middle of reading Hamnet, the news broke that Wildwood was getting delayed to next year, which is a real bummer. And I'm sort of deciding if I should try to read that book now, or if I should wait and read it next year. Because I am very much looking forward to that movie, and I don't know if it's too... I probably will read it now, but let me know if you would want a coverage on that book now or next year. At any rate, I also have the book Vineland, which is being adapted into the Paul Thomas Anderson film, One Battle After Another. I might also get the Life of Chuck book. There's a few different ones that I could get. I'm really excited to start this series again, and it gives me a great excuse to get back into reading. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care.